We've done a couple of book talks, we did an article talk, and we are now expanding out to topics that are related to research. So in our planning meeting, we had a great conversation about sort of how we wanted this session to go. So I'm really looking forward to the discussion. But I'll set the scene by talking about what we mean by research. So we're defining it very broadly. Yes, sometimes research is bibliographies and notes and finding things in the library and in research resources or doing field research. But research can really encompass like all sorts of activities that are ways that you're investigating subjects, topics, projects, and the information you're finding and collecting and synthesizing. And so Brad and I, when we were discussing, we thought, we should do a session on drawing. Drawing can be used as a type of research, whether that's analyzing your own work or working through your own work, your own ideas, or analyzing the work of others and the built environment. So we came up with drawing as our topic and invited a list of speakers. And then when we had our meeting, we realized that drawing is another topic that could be very broadly defined. And so we're defining that as well as broadly as possible. So there are all different ways that drawing plays a role, especially in the disciplines focused on the built environment. And so we're going to leave that open for our speakers to define as they so choose during the discussion. So just real quick, I'll run through the list. So Monte Antrim and Kristin Barry, both alphabetically at the top of the list and from architecture. Again, Lohren Deeg was unable to make it today from urban planning, Craig Farnsworth from landscape architecture, and Russ Richey in interior design. And again, I'm Amy Trundler. I'm the facilitator and the architecture librarian. And before we start with our first question, I just wanted to note real quick that there is a lot about drawing this spring. So if you hadn't already heard, there's an exhibition in the CAP Gallery up through the end of the month, sketchbooks by CAP faculty, exhibition organized by Monte Antrim, and then all of our speakers have at least one sketchbook in the exhibition. This also happened to be the time when we ran our bookmark contest, our first ever bookmark contest for the architecture library. We announced the winning designs last week, and the bookmarks are now available here at the desk. And then finally, we do have drawing books here in the architecture library. We have a display, but they're all available for checkout, and the display has slowly been disappearing as they've been getting checked out. So time for our first question for the panel, which is simply, what is your origin story when it comes to drawing? And we didn't talk about the order, but let's start with alphabetical order for this one. So Monty, that means you're up first.
Sure thing. Well, I had a little bit of a creative background growing up. My parents were both, my mom had a very artistic, or still has a very artistic side, so that was pretty important. But I came to architecture school, specifically to this architecture school, in 1984 in the fall, and that was really pre-computer for the most part in CAP. And my whole 5 year period here was still essentially pre-computers in the curriculum. So basically, the coin of the realm, if you will, was drawing. That was how you developed your ideas. It's how you communicated with your professor, etc. So I recognized that that was going to be crucial. I wanted to do well. So I figured the most important thing to do would be to just practice a lot. So I started carrying a sketchbook and basically never stopped. So that really allowed for a kind of continual improvement in my drawing, and that facilitated my design work here to a great degree. When I left Ball State, I mostly worked in residential design work, and so I went a long time before I actually learned AutoCAD. and I don't think I ever really picked up any 3D modeling software to any reasonable proficiency. So drawing was always a key part of my process. Um, Eventually, I got laid off from an architecture job in the aftermath of 9/11 in New York, and I wound up doing design illustration for 20 years there. So that so my the skill set that I had built up in drawing turned out to be pretty crucial for me, and that's just basically been where I've been at for 4 decades now of just continual drawing as the thing that I'm focused on, as well as sort of practice in my everyday life.
Thank you. And Kristin, you and your guests are up next. What's your origin story?
Started about this age and that age. So apologies for all the movement happening on our end. So I was interested mainly in just different types of art through middle school, through high school. We had the required classes that we would take. And I realized because I did a lot of other things in high school that they were going to make me take introduction to art for a year, and I only had a year that I could take art classes. And so I have to give credit to my mother who advocated to the high school and said, can she submit a portfolio so she can do something different and not, be taking art appreciation for a year, since I only had a little bit of time. And I had a wonderful art teacher in high school, Mr. Mahoney, who unfortunately has recently passed away, but who allowed me to take these other interesting types of classes. And for me, that sparked really a lifelong love of doing a wide variety of types of art. One of the things that is, I think, slightly different. I went to architecture school as well because to me it was uniting art and math. And I didn't think I was a good enough artist to want to be an artist full time. My family also again was very supportive, but also very logical, and said, is there something else that you can do that would unite these types of things, right? You don't want the thing that you love to be the reason that you're not successful or not able to feed your family or things like that. And so I came to architecture that way. But as opposed to always carrying around a sketchbook, one of the reasons I don't have a ton of them is because I tend to do one-off large pieces. My favorite media to draw with is a 6B pencil. So again, very soft, and I do very gestural work, as well as oil pastels and things that are, again, much kind of larger, I guess, in scale for me. So that's really been how I've been revisiting it over the last several years. So as well as, teaching my students that they need to be able to communicate, through a variety of media, when I have the chance to do it, I tend to take large pieces of paper with me, 8.5 by 11 kind of at a minimum, and much prefer working things out in a very large scale, I guess.
Thank you, Kristin, and guests. So Craig, you're up
Yeah.
next. What is your origin story?
Yeah, thanks, Amy. Well, I'm already seeing some common points here with Monty and Kristin. My origin story probably starts in high school as well, where I took it was a industrial arts survey. That's what they called it. I started in auto mechanics. That was not a good fit. But I got into architectural drafting, and I absolutely loved that class. And I too had a wonderful teacher, Mr. Johansson, who just really impressed on me the logic, the structure, the systems of drafting. And like Monty said, this was all pre-computer, and so this is how we communicated. I got a job at a civil engineering firm when I was 14, and I worked there summers and breaks whenever I could. The reason I got the job, they told me afterwards, was because I printed all the letters on my application. And so I guess they figured, well, at least he can letter a few drawings for us. And I did everything there, empty waste baskets and ashtrays and so on. But they also let me draw. And this was back in the early 80s, and they're all smoking cigars in the middle of the day and stuff. It was quite a different time. But I picked up a lot and really learned what it was that made drafting, architectural design, and communication so effective. And then back in the high school classroom, they had some bookshelves of different textbooks and so on. And I would pull those down, and I really loved the perspective drawings. And the perspectives that I was really drawn to oftentimes were done by landscape architects. And I didn't really know what the profession was, but it got me thinking about, college and what am I going to study. And I looked at schools that had landscape architecture, and Ball State was one of them. And so one thing led to another, and I came here. So I really found my footing with the drafting, the hand graphics, and really took to the marker and pencil, which we were so adept at here. But after graduation, I went to graduate school at University of Virginia, and I was exposed to a different kind of landscape architecture graphics, one that was much more subtle, much more graphite, black and white, and watercolor. And where I really hadn't had any watercolor here at Ball State, I got a really wonderful instructor at UVA who was an architectural illustrator and fantastic with a paintbrush. And I did classes with him, independent studies and so on. And that really launched me into another area where I did drawing and freelance illustration while I was doing my 9 to 5, 8 to 8 job in landscape architecture. And really have continued on that dual path, looking for avenues to illustrate both for the job at hand, but also freelance or travel sketching, et cetera. So anyway, we'll probably touch on these things later, but that's good for now.
Thank you. So Russ, you're alphabetically our last speaker. What is your origin story?
Well, I didn't really have a background in high school at all. And actually, I started out in pharmacy school and spent 2 years in pharmacy school, and had a roommate that was a landscape architect. And so I ended up over at the studio a good bit. And I really enjoyed it. I found that working in a pharmacy was not my bag. So I transferred over and into landscape architecture, and then kind of dovetailed interiors into that as well. So I got a degree in both. But in the meantime, I got a minor in architectural illustration and technical graphics at Purdue. When I was working there, my junior year, I had an opportunity to go to a Mike Lynn workshop, which was an illustrator out in Kansas, Manhattan, Kansas. And at the time, he approached me and one other person and said, "Would you like to stay on?" And they were 2-week workstation or 2-week work shops. And so I stayed on for 2 more. And then I also stayed for the entire summer and helped on the book in editing and drawing. And by that time, I was pretty much hooked. My style has got a little looser when I did architectural graphics. There used to be a lot of money in that. There's none now. So everyone, they've kind of taken some of the nuance out of it, and everyone can draw in SketchUp. So, but I still stick with the old stuff, and I sketch all the time. A lot of it's done in sketchbooks. Some of it's done on mail. Some of it's done on scrap piece of paper. So, but I sketch all the time. Love it, and actually, I can't. It's my way to think. So that's kind of my background.
Well, thank you as well. I like how in each of your cases, like drawing played a really significant role in like getting you to, your eventual discipline, whether that started in high school or later. Like it was pretty significant in like getting you to each of your areas. I guess that's why we're all here, right? So our next question is, how has drawing been used as a tool for discovery in your work? And as you've just heard from our panelists, I mean, they've had a variety of roles. They continue to have a variety of roles, and we're leaving that open too. So like, however you'd like to speak to that, but how has it played a role as a tool for discovery? And we're not doing alphabetical order anymore. So if anybody wants to jump in right away, and then it'll evolve from there.
Well, I will go ahead and jump in right
Okay.
away, just to be pushy, I suppose. Um, I think for me, the two big factors that come in are form finding and iteration as far as modes of discovery. I do a lot of sketching of things that just kind of catch my eye, whether that's an architectural condition or a graphic design or just a thing in the world. And in recording that in my sketchbook, in a way that I have that graphic solution in my kit of tools, or in my background that I can work with. It's led to in both in New York City and around here, since moving back, I do a lot of sketching of vernacular architecture, and I find that architectural configurations out in the normal world can really offer interesting solutions to architectural or other design problems that come up in the course of a project. And as far as iteration, I'm pretty much of the belief that when we are working digitally, I think that the software has a tendency to make things look polished and good when they may not really be that way yet in actuality. Whereas when you're sketching something, you don't get that sort of false finish sense. So I've always found that drawing through my ideas allows me to try out a lot more possibilities a lot more quickly than just trying to sort of work in the same mode of presentation that the final might be delivered in if it's going to be, finished renderings for something. So I find that if I sketch something loosely, I'll really I both see the essential aspects of it, but I also can try out a lot more ideas in the process.
Yeah, I'll pick up on that a little bit. I think the feedback loop that drawing provides is really the discovery tool that I get the most out of. The skill set never stops, right? You're always adding to it. An example would be my interest in shade and shadow, which is something that I didn't really understand or think that much about until I was doing more with watercolor and really exploring that and appreciating it. And then that filtered back into my design of physical objects when I was something that I considered much more as I was designing elements that might be used in a site or a larger site plan, that type of thing. But I think also one thing that's unique about our design professions is the way that we think about drawing as kind of these orthographic abstractions really of reality. Most people think of drawing as art, right? I'm going to draw a perspective. What can I see when I look out the window, kind of thing. And we really distill that into a series of different views, right? Plan, section, elevation, axon, whatever it might take. And one of the challenges I really enjoy is using many of those types coincidentally or at the same time to create a montage of images that among themselves start to really give that three-dimensionality, but also give us the ability or give me the ability to make notes and dimensions and kind of layers of color and so on that add up to not only a record of the artifact, but a record of my experience in making the artifact. And I think that's something I really appreciate.
I'll jump in for a minute because I think, Craig, that I love the word that you used, artifact, only because I'm going to talk about it in a very different way. When I went through architecture school, we could choose. We were early computer, we were using Form Z as three-dimensional form finding, but still a lot of hand drawing and drafting, AutoCAD two-dimensional work. As I was going through school, I had a big interest in history and had an opportunity where an archaeological site in Greece was looking for somebody who could draft. Basically, they needed a few things drawn. And so they were looking for an architecture student because we would be inexpensive. And I thought, well, that's a great opportunity to learn something new, and kind of took it and went to Greece and learned how to draw things on archaeological sites that eventually became drawing artifacts for archaeological surveys, becoming an archaeological architect and drawing wall sections. And again, I think it's also a way of seeing. So Monte, when you were talking about that and understanding by seeing these new things, that's really, I think what archaeology did for me is gave me this opportunity to look at things in a different manner, and be able to then have to communicate those. And so using these very technical drafting skill sets to try to understand a profile of a piece of pottery when you only have a chunk of it, so that we can do a comparative analysis, and trying to understand where different soils and based on these very minute, color differences. And so to me, it really enhanced this idea of discovery and seeing things in a different light when there are such minor differences between things, and you're asked to organize that really in your brain. So for me, that was a big part of that idea of discovery of, oh, I can use this in a lot of different ways. And it can also really enhance the way that I see the world.
It's kind of funny. We all look at things entirely different. I don't, in sketching, I don't really look at sketching as a structured thing to me at all. In fact, it's probably, most of my sketches they are totally, like, it's a way for me to express myself. And I will tell you that 90% of my drawings, when I start them, I have not an entire clue what it is until it starts to spill itself out, and I start to see things in it. And then I will finish the sketch. It's kind of like, and I tell my students, kind of like walking out in the sky and looking up and saying, oh, I see a pig in the clouds. Sometimes I find a pig in my drawings, I didn't mean for it to start that way. I
think Da Vinci felt that way about pigs too.
That's
or
good.
About clouds anyway.
Yeah, it really kind of, it allows me to express myself without being organized. And I think that in a vector-based world where everyone's drawn in Revit or AutoCAD or Rhino or what have you, not that Rhino, I don't think Rhino's vector-based, but we all see straight lines, and a lot of my sketches are influenced by my study in landscape architecture. And I use fluid lines and that sort of thing, but it helps my mind escape and become, I don't know, I find textures that I didn't know were in my head. It's kind of like dreaming. You dream, and you go to sleep, you dream, and you dream something that's really, wake up in the morning and you're like, that's the coolest space I've ever seen. Well, it's in your brain. It's in your brain. It may have been concocted for many things, but it's in your brain, but it's not allowed to come out because we're not kids anymore. We have too many other things to think about. So sketching, that's what it does for me. So,
Russ, I envy you on that. I always hear that story from other illustrators and so on, and they say, I'm not sure how it's going to start. I just dive in, I see it, it evolves. Hi, Tim, I'm looking at you. And I think, boy, that is what a great way to approach it. My mind just doesn't work that way. And I start with much more of a direction. What's the purpose? And I always think it's like in service to a project or an end result. I start with the mechanics of the drawing, but it's in the evolution of what those mechanics become that I start to see where the serendipity starts to occur, right? Where are the colors blending? Where are the shades and shadows going to evolve? And that's one thing people ask, they say, are you an artist? And I say, no, I think of myself as a designer, as a landscape architect, but as a draftsman who uses art to improve the way I see things or communicate things. And hopefully those artistic observations or impulses inform my work, but it's not the other way around for me. And it's just, I don't know, it's something I admire in what other people do, but I'm at peace with it now, and I do my own thing.
Well, and that speaks to, one of the other themes for these talks is the variety, like the variety of experiences and the ways that, this works like in your process or just in your kind of perspective. And so what I heard in that was there were occasions where you're like capturing ideas, like things that you're seeing out in the world, or ideas you're having, but then also sometimes working through them. Like I think Russ, you were talking like a little bit more about like working through these ideas that you're not even sure like what they are at the outset. Um, so it just, I love that there's so much variety, even within a group of this size. So one of our next questions was about how your experience with drawing has changed over time, whether that's like your approach or just, maybe how drawing itself has changed over time. I mean, that's been here and there throughout the discussion up to this point, like certainly um, AutoCAD and moving from the days when hand drawing was the be all end all, the only option to, now there's so many options, but hand drawing hasn't gone away either. It hasn't disappeared. So the idea of like what your experience with drawing how has it changed over time?
All right, I'll
I
jump
guess.
in again. Oh, wait, go Russ.
Go ahead. Go ahead. Nope. Go ahead, Monty.
Okay.
Go ahead.
I think for me a big shift in how I drew did come when I became a freelancer and I started putting my drawing ability more to the test kind of on a daily basis, and I became a hybrid illustrator where most of my freelance work was for other designers, architects, retail companies, things like that. And I relied on hand drawing things because I could generate things very quickly, scan those, and then use Photoshop to put in material textures, to layer drawings together, to make exploded drawings. And I think that was a huge advance for me in having simple ways that I could use digital techniques, but still retain some of the qualities of drawing by hand and be able to kind of really activate drawings very easily and do multiple versions of a drawing by taking advantage of the digital and not redrawing the hand done aspect. So that was a tremendous way that drawing changed for me at a certain point in time. I think other than that, it's mostly just been that with kind of 4 decades of continuous drawing practice, the drawing almost becomes constant and it's a way to register the differences in what my work is or what my life experience is. So in a way, drawing kind of became the stable part, and it's what I depict through drawing changed a lot more.
Um, Monty had mentioned about using technology. It used to be that I used to plot all these things out, and I used to either, measure them out, or I used to use a grid and that sort of thing. Well, with today's technology, oftentimes I will take something like SketchUp, and a lot of my design is in the round, so it's not exactly easy to find the round, and so oftentimes I will build things in SketchUp, but I build them in block form or in wire form now, and then I'll overlay them and I add all the details, uh, as I go. And sometimes, once again, I haven't even figured out what the crown molding is going to look like, or what that cabinet's going to look like. And sometimes I just find it in the drawing. It just feels right, and I start to, it influences me, and that's where the design flows from. So and that's one change. That's one major change that's really made my job a little easier. The other thing is that I don't sell my work anymore. I have a lot of people that say, why don't you put your stuff in this or that and sell it? And I've gotten to the point where I'm like, this is about me now, and I want to enjoy it, and I don't want to be a commercial artist. I still work for some architects around the United States and still do freelance illustration, but most of the time, most of my stuff is for me. and it's kept in file cabinets or in flat files. And I don't know what my kids are going to do with it when I kick off one of these days, but they'll probably throw it all out. But when you start doing it for money, then I start doing it for the commercial aspect, and all the enjoyment part of it, a lot of it is taken out. So that portion has changed for me as well. I used to do it for a living, and now I just do it for the hell of it because I like it. So
Yeah, I think we're all looking at our phones.
sorry.
No, I think one of the things that's changed for me is trusting muscle memory. That there's kind of this built-in understanding of proportion and what looks right just based on years of observation and drawing and imitating and curating what it is we draw. And I think trusting that that muscle memory is really important. And I think one of the things that I don't know if it's changed, but I've leaned into it more as in teaching, and that is sharing, making sure that I'm discussing ideas while drawing. And it's not even like, oh, I need to make conscious effort of that now, but it is just literally the way that I talk to students at their desk. You know, it's like, well, let's get out a piece of trace and start to work this out. And one drawing becomes another and another. And it's not a conscious decision of this drawing is, you know, I need a plan. And it just one thing evolves to the next. And that is really an enjoyable part, I think, of what we do. And, you know, scale isn't really the big deal, but proportion is, and really showing students how that drawing muscle memory comes into play. And it's just a real joy to see students that pick up on some of those little, you know, tips with tools. You know, it's like, oh, I'm going to use this kind of pen or this kind of pencil. And I used to do the same thing with my instructors too. And you go through a phase, and you know they'll move on to something else someday. But it's really neat to see them take on not just the effects of what the tools can do, but the how to use them, the appreciation for what they're crafting with them. And I think that's something that we're in a really unique position to be able to share, because all of us, you know, you've heard in our origin stories, we're kind of bridging that you know, advent of computers into the workforce kind of thing, where we all still remember that we were trained as draftsmen and drawing. And we can share that now with students. I think that's a really unique and privileged position.
Yeah, I think that raises I think one of the slightly later points, sorry, Amy, was what do we think, what do I think we haven't covered? And I was going to mention that aspect of how do we get students to engage with the drawing. It's something that I've been dealing with in the last couple of years since beginning teaching, because they aren't trained that way. I started taking mechanical drawing classes in 5th grade, and so I had, you know, orthographic projection was kind of second nature to me by the time I got here, as well as, and I think that gave a good foundation for drawing in general. So one of my big questions for myself in teaching is, how do I get that across to the students? How do I get them to make that a part of their process when it's not, you know, it's not necessarily quite the central technology that it once was?
Well, and that's an excellent segue to that question of like, what haven't we gotten at yet? I mean, there's lots, but you know, is there something that you heard today that you want to like pick up on a little bit, or something new that you want to bring to the conversation? So what haven't we talked about yet?
So this might be kind of an odd one, but it is one of my huge interests when it comes to drawing, is the actual brain chemistry, physiology that is motivated by drawing and really what happens. And I think one of the reasons that a lot of us still choose to practice drawing, I kind of heard everybody mention a little kernel of it, of something that they enjoy doing, something that promotes them to think differently. And you know, there's a lot of research that has gone into the physiology of your brain when you are drawing, and the points that it activates. And so that, and I think to me that also kind of bridges why I'm consistently encouraging students to do it, because it is this very singular, unique thing that happens when we sketch or when we draw. And so those neurons firing that don't fire for anything else, really, for some people, I'm sure it gives you the dopamine. I know for me, it does. It calms me down. So I tend to pick up drawing a lot in the evening when I'm trying to wind down, when I'm trying to make my brain kind of calm down. That's my way of doing it. And I try to share that with students, that there is this, not only is there this mental benefit, it's teaching you different things, it's allowing you to see things differently and translate and talk to clients and talk to your classmates and your professors, but there is also this very clear physical thing that's happening in your brain that is good for your brain. So it's a way of exercising a muscle that you don't exercise otherwise. And that's one of the things that I find really fascinating about it. I know that's really dorky, but the biology part of it to me is really fascinating.
So, Kristin, we need a bumper sticker. Drawing people are happy people.
Absolutely. Yes.
I certainly talk with my students some about if you just push it a little bit, you'll reach a point where you get that. Somebody mentioned feedback loop earlier, and I think it also involves dopamine. If you practice drawing enough as you're learning, you're going to hit a stage where you make a drawing that satisfies you, that gives you that sense of reward. And that's what I try to get my students to aim for, is at that point, you'll start doing it more because you realize that it does make you feel good. And then that becomes a constant source of improvement, that you draw because it makes you feel good, so you get better, so that makes you feel good, and it begins to be a kind of self-perpetuating, one of the better addictions a person can have, I think.
You know, Monty, you bring up that and I will tell you that so many people, they are convinced they can't draw.
Yeah.
And I always tell people the most intimidating thing is a blank piece of paper, because it could be a Picasso or it can be, a squiggly line on the sheet. It's up to you. It's kind of like a sculptor, in that you never know what you're going to find. And I always tell people, you know, the only place to start is to start drawing, and
Yeah.
and don't let someone tell you that, you can't do it. I would bet that 98, 99% of the people, when they were kids, they drew really pretty good sketches. And then all
Yeah.
of a sudden someone told them you can't do it, or that doesn't look good. And then they got to where now, if you could compare their drawings as a little kid and now, they're probably worse now because they don't think they can do it.
Yeah.
And they can't. It's in everyone. It takes a little practice sometimes. But I can remember the first sketch that I did in technical graphics that I really, really liked. I can remember it to this day. It's in my office. And it was that dopamine. It was like, wow, I can do this. I was always afraid of shade and shadow, and someone taught me really how to use cross hatching, and all of a sudden I'm like, oh, well, I can do that. And that was it. So yeah, it's like golf. It's really
I think we talked a little bit about body chemistry and mechanics and so on. I think another thing is just that I share with students is to stand up at their desks and draw, as opposed to just sitting down. I think engaging the entire arm when you're drawing releases something that, as we're looking for different forms that you're just not going to find if you're scrunched up at your desk using your wrist and your fingers. And I think when you're thinking it's finding the right tool for their job at hand, right, at the right scale. And sometimes, Kristin mentioned, I think, a 6B pencil. Sometimes that's what it takes. It's something loose, gestural, to find the big idea that now you can rally around, and the whole design can start to hang off of that, as opposed to designing discrete little things that are just on the paper together. And I think that's a real drawback in some of the computer programs, is that it encourages the habit of zooming in to the point where you can, really get fine-tuned, but you forget about what does it all look like when I pan back out and look at this as one entity, as opposed to starting from the big picture in, or having a relationship with a pencil and paper that allows you to change scales in and out quickly without fear of, I don't have the right program to do that, or I'm only in this program and my skills in this program aren't that good, so I'm just going to do the design that reflects the skill level that I have in the computer, as opposed to simply crank out the drawing that you want and then go to the computer and say, basically, this is what I need. And I will, I'll find somebody or I'll learn how to do it myself. But the computer now is in service to the idea that we have, as opposed to the idea is warped by our skills in the computer. I think that's a huge advantage to drawing, and one thing that's critical for students to be exposed to while they're here in school.
Yeah, I think that idea about working at multiple scales simultaneously is crucial, and it's a thing that I haven't seen any of the design software do that. You're either zoomed in so you can detail the fine parts, or you're zoomed all the way out, and you can't really, I find it I don't see any indication that you can move fluidly between those scales. I may be wrong, but it seems to me that that's something that drawing by hand really allows, is that you have the mental fluidity to just lean forward and think into the detailed parts of the drawing and simultaneously see the overall. And I've never been able to work that way. I've never found it reasonable to work that way within digital platforms.
You know,
Yeah.
you mentioned one thing that I sometimes I have my students and I have them do, I will maybe have them use a big Sharpie, a big fat Sharpie, which they're not comfortable with. But they come up with a big concept. Then when they go to the computer portion of it, I just have them scan them and then bring it into Revit or bring it into AutoCAD, and they can get that curve. They can't get that curve. They can't get that shape. They can't get that feel if they're just doing it in the computer. But if they do it by hand, then they can take it into the computer and they can emulate it, which helps
Yeah.
sometimes.
Yeah, emulate's a great verb in that case. I think that you can bring handwork in and let that be a sort of guide for digital work.
Yeah. Yeah, and it creates again, this kind of neural pathway, and goes back to muscle memory and all that, where over time, I suppose it's conceivable that the folks that are more digital natives, if they're exposed to this way of thinking, may someday be able to design in the computer initially because of this exposure. But I think it's really important to have that grounding, at least, in school, in the drawing arts. And I think one thing that came to mind when you were talking earlier was collaboration, and the ability for people to collaborate around a drawing. Back when I was starting in the offices, we would leave our drawings out at night on our drafting tables, and the project manager would come by with sticky notes or a piece of trace paper over the top and be marking things up. Come back the next morning, and it's like the elves were there overnight, making comments. But there was a collaboration that could happen because the drawings were out and visible as three-dimensional objects. When you're in the computer and you turn it off at night, or even you're zoomed in and somebody walks by, they have no idea what you're looking at, and so there's no conversation there. If you're working on a table, or there's things pinned up on the wall, you can be putting trace over it. And I think it's not an either or, it is a back and forth between the two. And we've talked a little bit about this hybrid model, which I think is fantastic. But we have to impress on people that once it's in the computer, it doesn't mean that's the end of the line. It's just another stage in this loop that is back and forth. If it's not built, the process isn't over. We're still designing until it's built. So that's important.
Well, we've got just 4 minutes left. We're going to end right at 12:50. Is there anything else we want to bring up? Any questions you might have for each other? I do have a question. So Kristen's mentioned a couple times that her kind of go-to is it's the 6B pencil. Is that right? Does anybody else have a go-to? They're sort of long time favorite.
I have Fountain pen is pretty core to me. Fountain pen and my particular sketchbook format. I do a lot of other types of drawing as well, but that's kind of the constant one. And it tends to be just dive in with the fountain pen. I don't block things out. I just kind of start, and this is if I'm drawing a scene in front of me. I kind of I just sort of dive in and tackle it. But I love the commitment of fountain pen, of just going straight to it and letting three lines be down there, and one of those three might be close to what you actually want, but the other two are still in there as well. That there's a strong sense. I think drawing can include indeterminacy in a way that maybe the digital has a harder time naturally incorporating.
Yeah, I like that idea of drawing several lines. And I tell students the answer is in there somewhere. You've drawn
It's more like a
the
cloud of
the
possibilities in a
the
way.
averages, you're the economist. Now find the average within that, but the answer is in there. You've drawn it, but now you need to parse it out, and we can talk about then how best to find that. For me, it'd be a soft pencil. It's hard to see maybe, but just a 314 or a 6B, 4B, something like that. A lot of things I use are the Flair, Papermate Flair felt tip, and I really like those because I can get a variety of line thicknesses. So on trace paper works really well. So I get thick to thin lines, very expressive drawing. So especially if I'm teaching or doing something in an office, that those are the pen in particular would be my go-to.
All right,
I would
Russ.
say I would say that I have no particular, literally, you can ask my students. Usually I grab in my bag and I take out a bunch of pens of all different types
Mhm.
and I just start grabbing. Now, I will say, in I try to tell my students in most of their drawings, try to use 3 pen weights so
Yeah.
that you have, nice variation in there. But I don't know. I draw with a fountain pen. I may draw with a big fat, the big 5.6, big lead stuff. I may do a pencil. I may got these hybrid art pens that I use that are Pentel. I have Sharpies. I use a little bit of everything, and sometimes if I don't have anything, I'll just bite my finger and do it in blood, maybe. So whatever gets in the way. And sometimes, we were on vacation uh, in down south in the islands over Christmas, and I didn't have any paints, so I took different types of coffee, and I did coffee. I had a paintbrush; it was a bad one, but I started using coffee and watering it down, and using different types of coffee in order to get a nice, rich sketch out of it, and used it as watercolor. So experimentation is everything. You will find what you like. So,
Yeah. I think
Mm,
watercolor pencil would be one more that I would put in there. For a long time. I didn't really understand what a watercolor pencil was supposed to, or what it could do for me. I tried to make it do what watercolors could do, and I was really frustrated. It didn't give me the look I was looking for. But when I started to use it as a sketch tool, that I didn't worry about the color, I worried about the value. And using the watercolor pencil to define those values and then add water with a travel brush really did open up some interesting possibilities. And I think that's another go-to I have, especially for travel, because you can add water back in the hotel room, and you're not dependent on that waiting for it to dry.
well, and that brings us right to 12:50. So, thanks to all of you for being part of the panel. If you have questions for our panelists, you know where to find them. Their email addresses were all up at the beginning. They're all, here at Ball State. This has been a great discussion. I've really enjoyed it. I hope you all have as well. And just thank you. Thank you for the discussion.